Misplaced Monk here. Today's video, Iron Man vs. Captain Marvel Beef Origin Part 2. Here we go. At this point in the story, Carol is now the leader of a group of heroes known as the Ultimates, which consists of Black Panther, Monica Rambeau, Blue Marvel, and America Chavez. One of their more notable feats is the time they transform Galactus, the Great Devourer, into Galactus, the Lifebringer. We next see Carol in her office when she gets a surprise visit from a fellow superhero and psychoanalyst, Doc Samson. During this chat, it is revealed that Carol no longer wanted to merely respond to disasters. She wanted to stop them before they happen. She wished there was that one thing that would protect everyone from all comers. Doc Samson would suggest maybe that's why superheroes exist.
And what if one day we're just not enough?
So far, so good. This insight into Carol's mindset is important to note because it sets the tone for this stage of the beef. Weeks later, we see the Avengers in the middle of a tough battle against some unknown celestial behemoth. Just as things were looking grim, backup arrived. Carol would fly by Tony's side and ask him if everything was ready, at which point Tony called on Doctor Strange. Strange, along with a group of magic users, would then cast a Dimension Reverser spell. Once the spell was cast, the behemoth would vanish in a cloud of smoke. As the collection of heroes rejoiced over a job well done, Nova would ask, "Who gave us the heads up on this? How did we know this was coming?" But the question fell on deaf ears. The next evening at Stark Tower, we see Tony giving a toast, thanking the Inhumans for the warning about the behemoth, noting how well-timed and specific the heads up was. Later, as the heroes mingled, She-Hulk would ask Carol, what was that thing they fought, and how did they know it was coming? Carol wouldn't know anything about the creature, but said the warning had something to do with the Inhumans. Being the lawyer she is, She-Hulk would then ask, but what did they know, and how did they know it? Carol would suggest they ask Medusa, Queen of the Inhumans. Once they tracked Medusa down, Carol would ask her,
How did you know this was all going down?
"I was literally about to ask the same question," Tony would interject. Medusa would look suspiciously at her fellow Inhumans, then tell the group of heroes to follow her. Medusa would then lead the group to a back room to reveal a young man. "If you want to thank someone for yesterday, thank him." Ulysses would bashfully introduce himself by telling the Avengers he was a huge fan. Cap would cut to the point, asking Ulysses how he knew the attack was coming. After getting permission from Medusa, Ulysses would simply say he saw it. After being asked how he was able to do this, Ulysses would admit he didn't know. He just sees a vision. At that time, Tony would ask someone to get Jean Grey to read Ulysses' mind. Once in the room, Jean would explain that she was going to create a limited mind hive between him and everyone in the room. Ulysses would be able to show everyone what he sees and what he does. Jean would then tell him to relax and tell his story, and she would show the group what he sees. Ulysses would begin to tell his story, but as he spoke, nothing happened. As the group waited for something to happen, Jean would inform them that Ulysses' mind was like a closed system and could not be read. Carol would then ask Ulysses,
Are you looking for a job? Are you exclusive to the Inhumans?
"Really?"
My team could really use you. We're specifically looking for ways to stop disasters before they happen.
"Really?" Carol would side-eye Tony and ask him what the problem was. Tony would say they have an Inhuman they've never met whose mind is a closed book, who can somehow tell them a future, and wondered if that was good enough for her. Carol would then tell Tony that it was good enough for him yesterday. He would respond saying that he didn't know how the information was gathered yesterday. She would then ask if knowing that would have changed his mind. Medusa would ask if it was because the info came from an inhuman. Tony would assure Medusa that wasn't the case. He expressed that although Ulysses could see the future, they had no idea who he was and no idea of the probability ratio his power is working with. Carol cared nothing about probability ratios. All she cared is that the world keeps turning. Rhodey would back Carol by saying it wasn't a possible future, it was going to happen. Did you see that thing? But it didn't happen because we stopped it. So it wasn't the future he saw, it was a possible future. Think about it, replied Tony. As the group stared at Ulysses in silence, Carol would say,
If everyone is alive at the end of the day, it was the right thing to do.
Tony would ignore Carol and ask Ulysses to tell the group how he got his powers. Ulysses would say a few weeks ago he was hit by Terrigen Mist, a gas that activates the inhuman gene that is present in some humans. Once he emerged from his cocoon, he seemed the same and didn't notice anything different. But suddenly, it happened. He could see things, visions. He didn't know what they were or why they were. And he didn't just see them, he experienced them as well. He would go on to say that he thought he was having a psychotic break, but then the royal family took him in and showed him how to control his powers. Then one day, Ulysses saw the earth destroyed. He looked around and saw what day it was. He saw when it was coming, but it never happened, thanks to the heroes. Tony would then ask a hypothetical question to the group. What if Ulysses says to them he just saw a vision of the Hulk making out with Ultron, and a baby popped out, and the baby was a reincarnated Hitler? Do we stop the Hulk before it happens? Do we lock him away before he does something we don't like? Tony would then turn to Carol, telling her that yesterday was an easy call. The big cosmic monster was stopped. No harm, no foul. But what if next time it isn't so easy? What if the next vision is of one of them? Tony would then ask Carol, what if Ulysses tells them she was a danger to our future? Do they stop her before the vision happens, even though she didn't know she was going to do it?
Depends.
On what? The two would stare each other down for a hot minute before Carol would exclaim,
I thought you were a futurist.
Tony would explain that he is, but it means he respects and believes in the future. Tony would finish by saying that they should be careful about what Ulysses tells them and what they do about it. After telling them to enjoy the party, Tony would exit the room. 3 weeks later, we see King T'Challa and Captain Marvel at the Ultimates headquarters, the Triskelion, as War Machine was making a surprise visit. Carol would ask Rhodey why he was there. So you know this on again, off again long distance thing we do?
Yeah?
There's a plus side to it, or a downside, depending on your point of view.
What is that?
Sometimes, I just miss you. Touched by his words, Carol would tell him to remove his helmet, and tell T'Challa to turn around. Carol would then lay one on War Machine, so much so that Black Panther would pray to the ancestors, asking them not to let him throw up in his mask. Rhodey would ask Carol what she was waiting for, at which time the Inhumans would arrive. After greetings and salutations, Black Panther would thank Medusa for allowing the Ultimates to run some tests on Ulysses. He would tell her if they are to look to Ulysses to see the future, they have to know without hesitation that the intel was credible. Ulysses would tell the group that he wanted to know how to control his powers. Since he sees and experiences the future, he was worried about it getting to him. Carol would add that she worried about the experiences altering his ability to see the future clearly.
But if we can figure this all out, you may be the most important superpowered person to come along since...
But before Carol could continue, Ulysses would have a vision.
What is it?
Thanos. His name is Thanos. He's coming. We are then taken to Mount Athena, New York, home of Project Pegasus. All seems quiet and peaceful when suddenly there was a flash of light, followed by the arrival of the Mad Titan, Thanos. But no sooner than he arrived, he was surrounded.
Thanos, you are under arrest.
He would blast Captain Marvel, shouting, "You Earth Avengers are not supposed to be here." A battle would ensue. During the fight, Thanos would say that the cosmic cube belongs to him, not Earth, and they would not keep him from his prize. After absorbing the initial blast that started the battle, Carol jumped back in, returning the favor to Thanos. She would then shout,
"Rhodey, now!"
From out of nowhere, War Machine would rain fire from above, shouting, "Surprise attack on top of surprise attack! Boom!" Temporarily stunned, Thanos would ask, "How did you even know I'd be here?" As Medusa tangled her hair around him, War Machine came in with a second wave of heavy artillery. The Mad Titan would suddenly throw Medusa into War Machine, causing Rhodey to fire a missile directly into She-Hulk's chest. Horrified, Rhodey would call out for She-Hulk while scanning the flames. Then out of nowhere, War Machine took a powerful straight left from Thanos, causing the back of his suit to explode. As Carol watched in horror, calling for Rhodey, the Mad Titan would say, "Now give me my cube." Thanos' arrogance caused the remaining heroes to crank up the pressure. Overwhelmed, Thanos would again be stunned, then KO'd by Carol with a beautiful right hook. As Carol cried out for Rhodey, Blue Marvel would say She-Hulk was barely breathing. Carol would grab hold of Rhodey as she cried out,
"Oh God! Somebody help me!"
At Tony's lab, we see him testing out a new stealth mode on a suit. As he struggled to find the suit, Mary Jane Watson would enter the lab. "What did I do wrong now?" he asked. Sensing something was wrong, he would turn around to her and ask, "What?" She would say, "It's Rhodey. He's gone." At the Ultimates headquarters, Tony would execute the angriest superhero landing ever. "Where's Hill?" Maria Hill would tell Tony to calm down, but he would reveal a tear-soaked face. "Where is he?" Tony would eventually be led to War Machine's body. As Tony looked over James Rhodes' wrecked suit, he would ask, "How did this happen?" Director Hill would explain that Captain Marvel put together a task force, but before she could continue, Tony would yell, "Carol!" King T'Challa would try to calm him, but his words only seemed to enrage Tony. "Carol Danvers!" Tony would then corner America Chavez. "Where is she?" "Behind you," she meekly replied. Tony would enter the room to see a bedridden She-Hulk and a battered Carol. She would tell Tony that She-Hulk was alive, but the doctors weren't sure if she'll ever wake up or walk again. Tony would ask what happened, and Carol would simply reply,
"Thanos."
Shocked by this news, Tony asked if he started the attack. "Not exactly," stated Hill. Carol would say that they ambushed him. "How?" asked Tony. Carol would continue saying that she knew where Thanos was going to be and that she, along with her team, laid in wait for him. Carol would try to explain the cosmic cube angle, but Tony only wanted to know one thing. How? How did you know where he was going to be? Carol would stand in silence for some time, reliving the moment Rhodey died. "Carol?"
"Remember that Inhuman? The one who could..."
"No."
"He came to us. He had a vision.
"You killed my best friend. You killed him as good as if you did it with your own hands." At that, Carol would say that Rhodey was a soldier that went into battle, and that Tony wasn't the only one who loved him. "What was he even doing with you people? He's not on your team." Carol would say Rhodey was at the headquarters with her when the mission came up and he volunteered. I told you this would happen." Carol would apologize, but then double down on her decision.
"Knowing what we knew at the time, I'd do it again. And so would Rhodey, you know that."
"No, you don't say his name."
"I love you, Tony, and I'm truly sorry."
Tony would then ask about Thanos' whereabouts.
We have him in a cell down below. Mission accomplished.
Tony would then storm out of the room. When asked by Black Panther where he was going, Tony would say, "To make sure none of you play God again." Carol would call out for him, but at that moment She-Hulk would awake. She would weakly tell Carol, "Fight for it. It's our future, not his. Fight for it." After saying this, She-Hulk would flatline. Carol stood back and watched as the medical staff tried desperately to save Jennifer's life. At New Attilan, home of the Inhumans, we see Iron Man putting his stealth upgrade to use. After mapping out the city, Iron Man learned where Ulysses is located. As Tony stared at the sleeping Inhuman, his thoughts were on Rhodey. "Don't do this, Tony," said a voice from behind him. Medusa would tell him that Captain Marvel said he might come. She would advise Tony to go home and calm down. Tony would tell her that he was taking Ulysses. Medusa would tell Tony that Ulysses was a subject of her kingdom, and if the roles were reversed, he would never allow it. At that moment, Friday would advise Iron Man of a hull breach. It was Medusa's hair. She would plead with Tony, saying she understands his grief, but she cannot allow him to take Ulysses. As Medusa's hair began to enter Tony's nose and mouth, Ulysses would wake up in confusion. She would beg Tony to go home, as her hair began to consume Tony's suit and his entire body, suffocating him. Prepared for this situation, Iron Man would send a surge of electricity through Medusa's hair, causing her to cry out in pain. Soon, Medusa would pass out and fall at the feet of her alerted subjects. Naturally, a battle ensued. Iron Man would then proceed to take out Karnak with a chest blast. This prompted Crystal to blast Iron Man with lightning. Karnak would tell her that will only give Iron Man more power, but to everyone's surprise, Iron Man exploded. "It was a decoy," said Beast. "The real Tony Stark has taken our young Inhuman and is long gone." As Crystal and Johnny Storm watched Tony flying away, Crystal would say, "He just declared war on the Inhumans." Sometime later, at Stark Tower, Medusa pleaded with Karnak to stand down as he called out Stark. Friday would inform the group that they were trespassing and the authorities had been called. Karnak has the ability to detect structural weaknesses within a person or thing, so he began to search the tower for weak points. "He's not here," said Medusa. "In retaliation, I can bring this entire building down." As Karnak said this, the Inhumans found themselves surrounded by Team Carol. Carol would tell Medusa that the Tony situation would be handled internally and assured Ulysses' safe return. Black Panther would ask Medusa to calm her subjects and let the Ultimates handle it. Angered, Medusa would point out the fact that Team Carol didn't stop Tony from invading her country, yet arrived here to stop them. Karnak would add that they knew this was coming and did nothing. Carol would remind them that she gave them a big heads up, but she hoped that Tony would have calmed down before going off the deep end. Carol asked Medusa to just give her one chance to deal with Tony. We next see Ulysses waking up tied to a chair in a warehouse with Tony standing over him. Tony was basically running tests on Ulysses' brain to see exactly how his powers worked. Ulysses would tell Tony this isn't fair, and he could have just asked him to do the test. Tony would reply saying his friend died because of a mission he shouldn't have known about. Let's not talk about fairness. Suddenly, Friday would alert Tony of a security breach. On screen, Tony could see Team Carol heading towards his location. As panic settled in, Tony would begin to untie Ulysses. When asked what's happening, Tony would say, "Stuff's about to get really real." Ulysses would then ask, "What about how my powers work?" Tony informed him that Friday downloaded a copy of his brain, and if he survives what's about to happen, he'll figure it out. Tony would conclude by telling Ulysses to act like he was having fun. Suddenly, Thor's hammer would come crashing through the wall. Tony and Carol would greet one another, with Carol telling him that he created quite an incident. Tony would say he acted accordingly. He would then turn to the group saying, "We all understand what's happening here. Everyone knows that Rhodey is no longer with us, and She-Hulk isn't that much better off, because Carol wants to control the future." Carol would tell Tony she thinks he's having a bit of a nervous breakdown and wanted to help him. Tony would reply, "It's not a bit of a nervous breakdown. I'm having a complete and total nervous breakdown." As the two Avengers argued with one another, Ulysses began to have a vision. Once the vision was over, everyone in the room was disoriented.
Did you all feel that?
The group would deduce that Ulysses was now able to project his visions onto other people. He would apologize to them, then say, "The Hulk is going to kill all of you." In Utah, we see Dr. Bruce Banner in the middle of a task when he is interrupted by Carol. "Oh, Colonel Danvers, what a pleasant surprise. What can I do for you?" Carol would ask Bruce what he was working on. He would say genetic calculations, but he's not sure she would understand the specifics. When asked if it was gamma related, Bruce would ask if something was wrong. Tony would step from the shadows, demanding Bruce answer the question. By this point, Bruce was uneasy, declaring that he hasn't had a Hulk incident in almost a year. Tony would then tell Bruce it would be better if they talked outside. When asked what's outside, Tony would simply say, "No matter what happens, stay calm. I believe in you." Once outside, Bruce was surrounded by a large group of heroes. Overwhelmed, Bruce would cry out, "Oh my God, what did I do?" Tony would say, "That's the thing, Bruce. You haven't done anything. Yet," said Medusa. Carol would then introduce Bruce to Ulysses and tell him that the young Inhuman sees visions of the future. Of a possible future, added Tony. The rest of the team would explain that Ulysses also experiences these visions, and he made it so that they all experience one vision in particular. Bruce, shocked by this point, would ask Tony, "How bad?" "All the way bad. I mean, you see what's going on here." Tony would tell Bruce that they were in a moral dilemma. "Wait for me to Hulk out, or stop me before it happens," replied Bruce. He would then turn to the group of heroes and ask if they were here to put him down. Carol would say no. Both her and Tony concluded that they needed more proof. "Proof? What proof?" asked Bruce. At that moment, Beast would reveal that Bruce was experimenting on himself. He would explain that Bruce was injecting himself with treated dead gamma cells. This would shock the team due to the fact, in the past, Bruce experimenting on himself never ended well. Bruce would tell the heroes they didn't understand, and his new work kept the Hulk away. Maria Hill would step in and tell Banner that they had to detain him. Now annoyed, Bruce would state again that he hasn't hulked out in a year due to his experiments. Tony would urge Bruce to calm down, but Bruce's tone was a bit more aggressive. "You all come to my home, and you accuse me. What did you think?" But before Bruce could finish this statement, an arrow would fly from out of nowhere, entering Bruce's back, then piercing through his chest, killing him instantly. Carol would send Team Carol to the tree line to investigate. As they headed out, it was clear that Tony was beyond upset. He would shout at Carol, telling her he was here to help Bruce. He was there to stop her from doing something like this. As the heroes approached, a voice would call out telling them to stop, followed by a bow falling from the tree. The heroes were shocked to find that Hawkeye was the shooter. Tony would continue to shout at Carol. "We were supposed to be guarding, protecting, defending, avenging. What was this?"
Accountability.
"You made this happen, Danvers.
That's not fair.
You chased this. You couldn't leave this alone. And now, another one of us is gone. Who's next on your list, Danvers?" Carol would advise Tony to let S.H.I.E.L.D. do their job, but Tony would tell her that she wasn't coming back from this. Hawkeye murdered an Avenger, and he was going to be buried for it. And then she would be buried for forcing his hand. Hawkeye would soon be arrested and charged for the murder of Bruce Banner. The case would eventually go to trial, and contrary to Tony's predictions, Hawkeye would be acquitted of all charges. It was revealed that Bruce asked Hawkeye to kill him if he ever appeared to be hulking out. Bruce even provided a special arrowhead to do the job. This was backed by a video diary Bruce made before his death. At the same time the verdict was reached, we see Tony in his lab. He and MJ were discussing the verdict when suddenly Friday would ask Tony if he wanted to know how Ulysses' powers worked. Tony would tell Friday to show him, which left him in shock. Sometime later, we find Tony sitting on the floor of a darkened room. He tells someone off page that he's lost and needs their help dealing with Ulysses. He knows they think he's being overdramatic and he's simply lashing out at Danvers because of Rhodey and Bruce's death. But it didn't mean he was wrong. Tony would go on saying that the future isn't written. You can't see a future that hasn't happened yet. But this Inhuman keeps having these visions. He doesn't just see them, but he experiences them. How can that not be affecting him mentally? He would then show the digital evidence that Friday discovered. Everyone and everything in the world puts out energy. Ulysses' brain takes all of that energy and spouts it out in the form of a vision, a theoretical vision of the future. Ulysses was creating an algorithm of a possible future. It's math. It's guesswork. Ulysses was profiling their future. And with Carol acting on it as if it were the Bible, she's profiling individuals. No one in Ulysses' visions had accountability for themselves. Since the Hulk incident, Ulysses' visions have become more powerful, so much so that other people can see and experience them as well. And as the power grows, do his visions become more or less accurate? So there it is. You tell me I'm wrong, and I swear I'll give up. Ironically, a few hours before this meeting, we see Carol and her team acting on a vision from Ulysses. They surround a woman leaving work and place her under arrest. Once the woman was detained, an officer would bring Carol the briefcase the woman was holding. Carol would open it to reveal it was empty, even showing it to Ulysses in disbelief. Back in the dark room, as the small group of heroes processed all of that info, Cap would ask Tony if he was 100% sure of his findings. Tony would reply he wouldn't have called the meeting if he wasn't. Cap would then give Carol a chance to speak. She would say she wanted Beast to cross-check Tony's work. What would that do?
Make me trust it.
Shockingly, Beast would say he already did, and his findings weren't wrong. So, in front of all of us, knowing what you now know, Carol, what are you going to do? Even under such pressure, Carol would dig her heels in the sand and stand by her actions. She would then ask Tony if someone had told him that guy over there has a gun and he said he was about to open fire. Do you check it out or wait until the guy opens fire to see if the first person was right? 80%?
What?
60%? 40? What would be the acceptable percentage for you to act on these visions in the future?
Tony.
What if there was only a 10% chance that the vision of the future was right? Carol would respond, saying if there was only a 10% chance Thanos was going to get the cosmic cube before they stopped him, that would be more than enough for her.
And Rhodey would agree.
Well, I'd ask him, but...
Okay, I'm done. Tony, back off. I don't know how many other ways to say it.
Carol would salute Captain America, then fly straight through the ceiling of the room. Later, at the Triskelion, we see the young woman who was detained earlier that day, sitting alone in an interrogation room. On the other side of the one-way mirror, Carol would enter the room, joining Director Hill and Black Panther. Hill would inform Carol that they can no longer hold the woman. After a thorough background check, the suspect had no ties to any organization on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s watch list. She was merely a banker that loves karaoke. Hill would say that the woman's fiancé was going crazy over the situation. King T'Challa would add that the woman's father is a Chicago police officer and her family has gone to the press. What was the Inhuman's vision about her? He asked. Seemingly ignoring the question, Carol remained in silent contemplation. Carol would finally enter the interrogation room and address the woman as Miss Green. Green would ask what was going on, and then demanded to be let go. Carol would then proceed to accuse Green of being a high-ranking, deep-cover operative for Hydra, working on a violent plot to destroy the financial institutions that hold the US and the world at large together. Carol would say that Green was attempting to throw the world into chaos, but she had her now. Carol demanded a confession from Green. She wanted names, places, and details on Hydra's plot. Miss Green had no idea what Carol was talking about. She simply worked at a financial institution.
Carrying an empty briefcase?
Green would say that was her old briefcase. She was switching it out for a new one she left at home. Out of options, Carol would threaten Green, saying she had the legal right to hold her there indefinitely. Green would then question the criminality in carrying an empty briefcase. Annoyed at this point, Carol would then exit the room. Green would then proclaim she was Allison Green, a US citizen that didn't do anything wrong. She has never been arrested and her dad is a cop. She gets a phone call and she wants to call her dad. You need proof.
We'll find it.
Carol.
We'll find it!
As Carol was about to say something, Allison Green would vanish in a puff of brimstone smoke. Carol would say it was Nightcrawler, but blamed Tony for the escape. Both Hill and Carol rallied their respective troops as the building went on lockdown.
I'm arresting Tony Stark.
You'll need to find him first. No you won't. Hill would tell them that Tony was on the rooftop. Carol would say they're ready for this. Not this. Carol would step onto the rooftop to see Tony backed by a large group of heroes. Tony would tell Carol he tried to warn her, but Carol would declare that he was under arrest. Tony would say good luck with that. Once the public sees what she's been up to, she was going to have her hands tied. Carol would remind Tony that he broke into a federal building, but Tony just talked over her. From where I'm standing, you're a little outpowered today. Do the math. Stand down.
Outnumbered? Hardly. I've got friends all over the place.
Lines were drawn as Team Carol battled Team Tony.
I can't believe you, Tony.
You made this happen, Carol. You literally left us no choice.
Classic Tony Stark ego. All ego!
At the Inhumans' home base, Medusa informs Karnak that Colonel Danvers asked for their help in battle, to which Karnak said they should. Ulysses would ask why the heroes were fighting each other, but Medusa would ignore the question and tell him to stay put. Back at the battle, Carol would hit Tony with a powerful photon blast and tell him to stand down. Tony would tell Captain Marvel that she was trying to control something that could not be controlled, and she was losing her mind trying. As he said this, he hit her with an electrical blast. Carol would take the blast, saying she was surprised he forgot she can absorb energy and send it back to him. I didn't forget. Carol was suddenly enveloped in some sort of energy field, causing her to cry out in pain. Tony would tell her he made that blast just for her. He prepared for the future without upsetting the natural order of things or getting any Avengers killed. As Carol fell to the ground, Tony would ask, "Next?" At one point during the battle, Star-Lord and Cap were about to go head-to-head until Tony hacked into Quill's helmet. It's revealed during their conversation that Quill fully supports Carol's decision to use Ulysses' visions. As the two continued to speak, Vision would fire an energy beam. Although it missed his intended target, the beam destroyed the Guardian's ship. All they could do was stare in shock as the debris from the ship caused a secondary explosion on the Triskelion. Ulysses would watch the battle rage on and began to cry. But suddenly, tentacles of light began sprouting from his hand. As they grew longer, they would stretch towards the battle. At the same time this was happening, Iron Man was being overpowered by Karnak and Black Panther. T'Challa would demand Tony to call off the attack, But before he could reply, Carol would suddenly appear from the skies and hit Tony with a powerful right cross, followed by a fierce back fist. Before Carol could continue, Ulysses' tentacles of light made contact with the heroes as he experienced a vision. The heroes would find themselves in a desolate hellscape. As they got their bearings, something suddenly caught their attention.
What? What is this?
The heroes stared in horror as Miles Morales held a clearly dead Captain America in his grasp. The present Miles stared in shock as Cap and the others stood in silence. Miss Marvel would run to him saying that's not going to happen. He would ask her how she knew, to which she replied she just does. Carol would step in, moving Camilla to the side.
Kid, I'm sorry, but you're under arrest.
Tony would again criticize Carol for her actions, accusing her of now turning on children. Tony would express that Miles was a good kid and has done nothing wrong since becoming an Avenger. He found it ridiculous for Miles to be accused of something he has not done, nor shown any signs he could ever do. Do you know what I was when I was his age?
Drunk?
Well, yeah.
I'm not turning on him, Tony.
You just said he was under arrest.
For Hala's sake, I'm asking him to help us make sure that what we just saw doesn't happen.
By taking him into custody?
Fine, no arrest. I'm asking him to surrender.
For something he has not done.
Tony, please. I'm trying to protect him too.
The two would continue to bicker until Cap stepped in. Cap would tell Spider-Man that he was still a hero and not to worry. Spidey would say he would never do what the vision showed. Cap would agree. He would then ask Miles what he wanted to do. I want to go home. Cap would tell him to do that, and they'll figure out the rest later.
Captain! No, this isn't your call.
Cap would say Miles had the right to go home if he wanted to. He didn't do anything wrong, just like Bruce and Rhodey didn't do anything wrong. As Carol stood in stunned silence, Tony would tell Thor to take Miles home. Carol was outraged at the turn of events as Thor flew off with Spider-Man. Carol would shove Captain America off of her as she prepared to give chase. But before she could take off, Miss Marvel would keep her grounded and say that Miles did nothing wrong. As if tensions weren't high enough, Director Hill would inform Team Tony that by engaging in battle on government soil, they committed an act of terrorism. Therefore, they were now all under arrest. Tony would tell her to go climb a tree. Tony, I don't count to 3. Maybe you should. Black Panther would break the tension by saying if Hill fires on Tony, she'll have to go through him. He would tell Carol he could no longer defend her actions. If Cap chose to protect Miles' rights, then that is what he should have been doing this entire time. T'Challa would conclude saying, if you attack me, you attack the kingdom of Wakanda. Suddenly, Hill would cry out, "Oh no!" Carol would turn around to see Doctor Strange teleporting Team Tony away. As Carol shouted in frustration, Rocket would shoot a blast of energy at them, but they were already gone. Carol would then ask Medusa if she could use Lockjaw. Medusa would say, "No, goodbye." As the Inhumans vanished, Carol was stuck in a state of disbelief. Once back at home, Medusa and Karnak would approach Ulysses. They would ask him to tell them what's been happening to him. Ulysses would merely look back in silence. Doctor Strange teleported Team Tony to one of Nick Fury's secret bunkers. Tony would thank the heroes for their hard work, then turn his attention to Thor and Spider-Man. Knowing Miss Marvel and Spider-Man were friends, he tasked her with finding him. Miss Marvel would start to have second thoughts about being with Team Tony and wanted to leave. So she and her crew of young heroes decided to leave under the guise of going to locate Spider-Man. As the young heroes left, Tony would quickly deduce and reveal to the team that Miss Marvel was going to find Spider-Man and hide him from both himself and Carol. Black Panther would reveal that he left Carol due to the fact that not all of Ulysses' visions were accurate. He also wondered if Ulysses' accuracy was diminishing due to his power's growth and strength. Vision would conclude that there was only one way to find out if Ulysses' vision was true. Tony would reluctantly agree, but said it was up to Spider-Man and Captain America. As Carol sat on the rooftop of the Triskelion in contemplation, she saw the faces of Rhodey and Bruce. Overwhelmed with emotion, Carol would begin to cry. She was soon joined by Jean Grey, Storm, Star-Lord, and Maria Hill. Carol would ask Hill if she had any leads on Miles, to which Hill said no. Jean would say she's all for using Ulysses' powers, but there was no way the new vision was going to happen. Carol would counter by saying,
"But if it does and we do nothing, we basically killed Captain America ourselves. I can't have that on my conscience."
Hill suggested that they should find Ulysses and retest what he saw. No sooner than she said this, Hill would receive a message. SHIELD agents located Spider-Man at the Capitol building. As Spider-Man gazed upon the Capitol building, he was suddenly surrounded by police officers who demanded Spidey to remove his mask. Aboard the helicarrier, Hill and Captain Marvel discussed the logistics of extracting Spider-Man. Hill suggested teleporting him out, but Carol would disagree due to Miles' spider sense.
"He needs to want to come to us on his own. He needs to want our help."
After sending a message for the police to stand down, Hill would tell Carol that a battle at the Capitol on live TV would be a bad idea. She would add, if the Lincoln Memorial falls during the battle, both Team Tony and Team Carol would be looking for work from a prison cell. Carol would reassure Hill that she can do this. At the Capitol, the police would continue to demand that Spidey remove his mask. One of the officers would then receive a message to stand down, to which the officer obeyed. Once the officers left the scene, we see Captain America standing in their wake. At New Attilan, Ulysses finally came out of his trance. So while Ulysses was out, he had a vision of a dystopian future. He would eventually run into Old Man Logan, who reveals to him that this reality was the result of Tony Stark pushing Carol too far. Ulysses would say, "We have to tell Captain Marvel to stop fighting Iron Man over me right now." At the Capitol, Cap and Spidey stood face to face. Miles would again tell Cap he wasn't going to kill him. Cap would say he knows and asked him why he was here. Spidey would say the same reason why he was there, to prove it doesn't happen. Cap would agree as the two just stared at each other. After a moment of awkward silence, the two began to contemplate on Ulysses' vision. Spidey would say every vision Ulysses had, a big-time superhero dies, but he was sure Cap was going to walk away fine. Yet Spidey thought he might be in trouble.
"Then why are you here, really? And what did you expect me to do when you showed up here like this?"
Miles would tell Carol to leave him alone, but she would tell him that she had the best intentions for all parties involved.
"Cap, tell him I'm not Satan."
She's not Satan.
"Thank you."
Cap would follow up by saying he thinks this has all gone far enough. Carol would agree, but believed they shouldn't just hope it all worked out. She would extend her hand to Spidey, asking him to let her take him to someplace safe. As Carol moved closer to Miles, she was stopped by some sort of barrier. As she struggled to break through, she would suddenly realize who was doing this.
"Tony Stark! Be a man!"
I wasn't hiding. I was giving you one last chance. That was it. Tony would enter the scene with a powerful Superman punch. He would then fire a missile at Captain Marvel, which she easily deflected. Cap was lucky to get his shield up in time. Miles would plead for the two heroes to stop fighting, but it fell on deaf ears. Carol would power up and deliver a devastating straight right, crushing a portion of Tony's suit. Aboard the helicarrier, Team Carol watched as the battle unfolded. Hill was then contacted by Medusa, who urged Hill to stop the fight. When asked why, Medusa would try to get Ulysses to explain, but he was deep in another trance. At the capital, the battle raged on.
I told you if you ever interfered with me again, I wouldn't hold back.
You said you wouldn't arrest a kid for something he didn't do. Tony would fire 3 missiles that Carol easily dodged. Sadly, they hit Captain America head on. After being prompted by Tony, Friday would inform him that Cap's vital signs were healthy. In spite of the ever-growing collateral damage, the two continued to fight, even as Miles begged them to stop. Growing desperate and receiving no response from Director Hill, Medusa decided to stop the fight herself. Even though Ulysses was in a trance, she ordered Lockjaw to bring him along. Finally coming to her senses, Hill would dispatch Team Carol to stop the fight as well. Tony would catch Carol with a powerful left hook. As she recovered, it was clear she was done playing with him. At that moment, Friday would inform Tony that the suit's systems were failing. The Inhumans and Team Carol would arrive just in time to witness one of the scariest beatdowns in recent history. As Tony fell from the sky, Ulysses' visions seemed to engulf the entire area. When asked what he was showing them, he would reply, "The futures." Suddenly, the group was before the cosmic entity known as Eternity, the personification of time. It would tell Ulysses that he was part of a greater universe, and there was much more than just Earth if he chooses to join the other cosmic entities. Ulysses would shed tears of joy as he looked back at the heroes. Ulysses would then begin to dematerialize as he said thank you. Carol would cry out no as the heroes were sent back to their reality. Once they returned, they were met with the sight of Spider-Man holding a broken Tony. Sometime later, we see Carol and Beast standing under a fluorescent glow as she shared her experience traveling to the edge of the universe. They would both look down as Carol asked,
Is he going to die?
"In theory, one day."
Henry, is he going to live?
Beast would tell her she's not going to like the answer. In fact, he wasn't comfortable going any further with the examination. Dr. McCoy would say that Tony has been experimenting on himself for years. Whatever he did to himself is what's keeping him alive. He would have to dig deeper before he could know what Tony's condition was. He was too afraid to even draw blood. Beast would try to lighten the mood by telling Carol that at least she wouldn't be known as the woman who killed Tony Stark. Beast would inform Carol that Tony wasn't fighting her. Tony trusted her, but she opened a dangerous door, profiling people in the future. Even though it saved millions of lives, Tony was worried about who would come after Carol. How long until Ulysses' powers were used by someone deemed unworthy? Tony knew what would come next if he didn't stop Carol now. As Dr. McCoy sealed up Tony, Carol would drop her face into her hand. And chronologically, this is where the beef ends. Due to the experiments Tony did on himself, he would make a full recovery, be it a hairless recovery. He would then use the same experiments to bring James Rhodes back to life. Whenever Carol's name comes up post-beef, be it by Rhodey or by Tony's protege, Riri Williams aka Ironheart, he didn't seem bothered. Even in the Life of Captain Marvel's story arc, Tony reached out to Carol to offer words of support when her brother was in a coma, so it seems the beef is settled for now. And that was the beef origins of Captain Marvel and Iron Man. Perception is reality. None of this is real.